Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show. On John F. Kennedy's inauguration, just a day before his inauguration, it was freezing cold outside. Just on the eve of the inauguration, 8 inches of snow fell to the ground and caused the most crippling traffic jam for the first time. Hundreds of cars were marooned and thousands of cars were abandoned. And essentially, according to the National Weather Service, JFK had to cancel dinner plans, essentially as the president-elect, and he struggled to keep other commitments in addition to only getting 4 hours of sleep before one of the biggest days of his life. Because the very next day was the inauguration, January 20th, 1961. And what is most famous out of JFK's speech is when he said, essentially a call to civic action, a call for civic responsibility, is when he called for Americans not just to ask the government to work for them, but also to do something to maintain this fetal democracy that we have.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
That was President John F. Kennedy in 1961. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. An incredible moment that garnered so much applause and is one of the most famous parts of that speech by President Kennedy there. President Kennedy, of course, did not get to run for a second term. He was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, while traveling to see Americans across the country. He was one of the youngest presidents ever to serve in the Oval Office. But if you just go to look back on that moment, sort of like as a catalyst for change, as a catalyst for the young generation that was up to come, you look at that moment as in civic responsibility and civic participation and civic action is warranted. It is needed. It is implied. It is encouraged by the Declaration of Independence. We have a system of government where if it is not working for us, we effectively can petition it. We can do something about that on the grassroots level as citizens in this country. And that is what President Kennedy was alluding to. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Ask what you can do for your government in terms of what you can do to foster change if you are impatient for it, as Vice President Kamala Harris alludes to so much. I mean, what is happening right now with mass deportation in the United States? Hundreds of thousands of people being rounded up and questioned and deported by ICE, immigration officers. They're now also going into churches and businesses and schools, elementary schools and hospitals, sensitive places to carry out mass deportation. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Does that make you enraged? Are you going to do something about it? The federal government takeover in terms of government employees receiving buyouts. Does that make you enraged? Are you going to do something about it? Are you calling your elected members of Congress to petition them effectively to do something about what's happening? Are you freaked out enough about what is happening that you are going to do something? Or are you just going to sit on the sidelines and watch this democracy burn? because that is exactly what is at risk here. That's exactly what's starting. I mean, this is the start of the authoritarian government, the start of the dictatorship, the start of the oligarchy. When you have people like Elon Musk, an unelected autocrat who is making essential decisions in government, who is getting access to key government organizations and their passwords, like the federal payment system, who's also getting access to key government organizations and firing the director of the FAA, when technically he has no merit or ground to do something like that. We're talking not just about the consolidation of power, but it also is the consolidation of power, wealth, and greed. And that in and of itself is the start of a dangerous amalgamation of chaos that, if led to continue to breed, is going to create something that is almost irreversible. That's irrevocable. You know, people talk about 2028 in terms of there being another election for the presidency, or 2026 in terms of there being a midterm election for congressional officials and local elections. We may not get there. Just consider on its surface for a second. I don't want to do a long introduction because I have a very special interview coming up with an incredibly valued and philosophical guest on this, who has a very, very perspicacious insight on everything that's happening right now. This guy on your screen is Curtis Yarvin. And Curtis Yarvin is full-on anti-democratic. I want to play you a clip from Curtis Yarvin in 2012 about him talking about what conservatives need to do to essentially take back the reins of the government and how effectively we need to do things. And yeah, I mean, it's going to get a little messy. I mean, it's going to be a little bit chaotic, but, you know, this is what we have to do.
Why has no one ever suggested, let's just get rid of this thing? You have a government in Washington. You're either for it or against it. But what is a government? A government is just a corporation which owns the country. Nothing more, nothing less. It so happens that our sovereign corporation is very poorly managed. And there's a very simple way to replace that, which is what we do to all corporations that have failed. We simply delete them. We haven't been able to do that with our government for 200 years. So it's gotten a little bit stale. The other thing about getting rid of your government is you can't just say, well, the limits of the government are the limits of the formal government. You have to say, well, what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. You need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
We need a national CEO. What that is a dictator. In regard to the plane crashes that have been happening a lot, and Donald Trump dismantling the FAA by getting the FAA director fired by Elon Musk, what we are going to see eventually is something like the Hirsh fire in 1933. When that fire happened, Adolf Hitler was able to officially consolidate power in Germany. He was able to take the reins of everything. He said, see, all this unrest happening, the Jews are really bad people. We need to take power. And he was excused for it. People were scared. They were looking for someone to console them. And that is how the Nazi dictatorship began. That is how it started. There's going to come a time where there is our Hirsh fire, where there's going to be a false flag terrorist attack, something that all of us need to be alert to. And I'm not sure what that is going to come into, but we can sort of look at this tweet from Elon Musk here on January 9th, 2024. And you can see here in this tweet, one of my subscribers raised this to me last night after I did that report on what's going on with aviation in America. Thank you so much. Basically, in this tweet, Elon Musk says what it's going to take to end DEI in America, and even though he inexplicably and stupidly spelled it die, because no one understands what this is, especially on his part. You know, we're just blaming planes falling out of the air for DEI. He says what it's going to take to end diversity, equity, and inclusion in America is a plane crash with hundreds of people on it. Because then we can go after the ethnicity. or the gender of the pilot, we can use that to start ending DEI. But also, if what Elon Musk was alluding to there was ending DEI, is that also going to be the false flag terrorist attack? That is not just going to end diversity, equity, and inclusion writ large in the United States of America, but also effectively is going to be the start of the dictatorship. Is that going to be the false flag terrorist attack that says to all of us, hey, we need to take reins of the government. We need to take full reins of the government. There's too much chaos going on. You're looking for someone to console you. Let me be your comforter. But hey, we don't need the Congress and the courts. We just need the White House. We need the executive branch only for this. That is a live reality that we are facing. And for instance, if it is not that, which I doubt, which I doubt is not unlikely. If it is not that, is it going to be the fact that Donald Trump is using chaos and sowing fear, instituting the Project 2025 agenda, doing this to create social unrest, or to convince people that they need to take to the streets, to rile up people so much, to piss them off so much that they will take to the streets? And will he use that when Americans do take to the streets en masse, to use that as the moment to declare martial law, to use that as the moment to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would give the President of the United States the ability to use the military against the people, to stifle dissent? You think you can protest? Shut up. You don't have a voice. You think you can protest my regime? You do not have a voice. You cannot talk. Anyone that gets in my way will be shut down. Anyone that criticizes me will be shut down. And if you don't, you better get in line. And what does getting in line look like? That looks like Meta paying Donald Trump $25 million for kicking him off the platform after being taken off on January 6th because he incited a deadly insurrection against the United States government to overthrow a free and fair election to stay in power. That's what that looks like. That looks like ABC News paying Donald Trump $15 million for, I don't know, defamation? What? You're a journalism network. Your job is to report the news without fear, favor, or corporate interference. Oh, wait, corporate interference. Our journalists can say stuff, but the corporate heads that be. Journalism is under attack in this country. We are not going to survive this moment if not only journalists are caving early and acting surprised like they did not see this coming when they had every right, according to their journalistic standards and their responsibility as journalists, to report on the Project 2025 and Donald Trump's connection to it and not feeding into this false, mendacious, inexplicable theory that Donald Trump is not connected to Project 2025 when he unequivocally is. Journalism being dumb and ignorant has contributed to the rise of Donald Trump. That's why so many people are falling in love and trusting independent journalism, because the corporate heads that be are really concerning here. It is really monetary gain over democracy. It is really monetary gain over actual truth, live reporting. That false flag terrorist attack is going to come. And it is going to be a moment where Donald Trump, as president of the United States, is going to see, we got to get the country under control. We need to shut down the airports. We need to, hey, Marco Rubio at State Department, we need to revoke passports. People can't get in or out the country. We need to shut down the airports. You cannot fly in or out of the United States. Heck, while we're at it, we may even shut down state travel, interstate travel. You want to go see a family member in Chicago? You want to go see a family member in California? Oops, sorry, can't get there. Republicans are going to be going along with anything and everything that Donald Trump says. But in terms of the resistance, that is us. That is the Democratic Party. What are we doing writ large to do something for our country and not have our country do something for us? Because we're in a moment where our country effectively cannot do something for us. So we have to do something for the country to preserve it, to defend our institutions. I mean, as Vice President Kamala Harris said repeatedly on her campaign trail, young people are impatient for change. We are impatient for change in the way that things are going and the way that things are happening. And that looks like calling Democrats to be a louder force right now. That looks like us having more AOCs and more Jasmine Crockett's in our Congress. That looks like the resistance getting louder. That looks like the resistance getting vociferous and not playing nice, because this is not the era of nice politics. They are burning down the democracy. They are quite literally massacring the democracy. And we're just bringing butter knives to a gunfight, as Jasmine Crockett says here. Democrats in Congress, if you have not already, wake up. This is a 5-star alarm fire. This is not traditional politics. There will be no 2026 midterms. There will be no 2028 Democratic presidential elections if we do not actively get this together right now. Wake up, or the democracy is going to die on your watch, and it is also going to be your problem as well, because you contributed to it falling because you did nothing about it. There are people in the Democratic Party speaking out about what's happening, but it needs to be together. It needs to be a consolidating force. It needs to be a galvanizing, collective, united force to protect democracy in the United States of America, to protect the people's representative republic, to protect the systems that be. Be the resistance. The only way to defeat mass authoritarianism, the only way to defeat authoritarianism is mass resistance. I've repeated this so much, and that's exactly why I wrote the book. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. What does that look like? And how are other people in other countries, quite frankly, fairly next to us, how are they taking this moment? My guest is Jesse Hirsh. He is a former Canadian journalist, and he is someone that is enthusiastic and fired up about this matter. And it's going to be a very energizing conversation, and he joins me next. Stay with us. So, I just wrote a book. It's called Resistance, a strategic guide on how to fight back, defend democracy, and avoid a Trump dictatorship. A lot of people have been feeling heartache and despair and despondency after the 2024 election. And that definitely is widely understandable, especially when you consider the guy who's literally about to be sworn in as president as someone who said that he was going to terminate the Constitution and be a dictator on day one. So in my new book, Resistance, what you get is 7 rules on how to defend democracy, to avoid authoritarianism, and how to literally fight back. It is compelling, richly historic, and a call to action. Resistance, out now. The link is in my bio. It's in my link tree. And once you click on the link tree link, you have like 3 different versions of the book pop up. Get your copy today. This here is a petition from one of my followers. Her name is Chrissy, and she started a petition on resistance, effectively urging House Democrats and Democrats in Congress writ large to do something about the fact that there is a hostile takeover with officials like Elon Musk in the government, who is an eccentric billionaire, and the influence of Peter Thiel, as well as Curtis Yarvitz in government. And the fact that we are quite literally looking at a right-wing Republican hostile takeover of the United States government to install a Christian fascistic dictatorship. That's what we are looking at. And Chrissy started this petition, and so far it's garnered this much signatures, but we need your help. I need all of you to spread this video with as many people as possible and to get this petition out there so we can get way more signatures and so we the people can work, because once again, as I always say, the only answer, the only way we can defeat authoritarianism is mass resistance. So, sign the petition, spread the word. Of course, I'm going to be speaking tonight with my guest here on the show, a Canadian journalist, Jesse Hirsh. This was that interview that I recorded earlier today. Joining me now for the interview is Jesse Hirsh. He is a former Canadian journalist. He is also enthusiastic about farm life. Mr. Hirsh, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure, Jeremiah. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
With regard to everything that's been going on in the world, how have you been mentally?
Um, Difficult. The benefit of having a farm is I'm able to physically work out a lot and cuddle my dogs and spend time with my animals. So I encourage everyone listening that if you don't have a mental health strategy, a self-care strategy for this unprecedented moment in history, it is essential. But to answer your question straight out, stressed, anxious, alive, kind of keeping moving, like the Rolling Stone gathers no moss principle. But if I'm totally honest, scared.
Yeah. Um, as someone who has previously been in the field of reporting, how have you been able to balance checking in on the news? Because I do not have a balance and it's completely horrible. It's the overconsumption can actually kill you.
Tangentially but relatedly, I am an addict and my family have been addicts. So I sort of understand the need to manage these things because news is an addiction unto itself, and especially in a time like this. I would say the primary benefit of my previous professional capacity and environment, because I would hang out in newsrooms and hang out in control rooms, kind of watching radio news and TV news get put together, is I quit that stuff in the kind of 2017, 2018, and I created my own internet sources. So I tapped in to journalists. I spent time really creating social media so the algorithms work for me. And with the exception of X, aka Twitter, which is an absolute abomination, the rest are working for me in the sense that they're keeping me informed, but they're also feeding me hope. Right? They're feeding me the people who are fighting back. They're feeding me the stories of resistance. Like, for example, the fires in Los Angeles, I was getting lots of reports of mutual aid initiatives, right? And neighbors helping neighbors and restaurants giving away free food. So as long as my sources balance that, like as long as I've got the, oh my God, everything's on fire, combined with here's how communities are mobilizing, organizing, and standing up to this nightmare, it makes it possible. It makes it tolerable. And you're not going to get that from mainstream media. You're not going to get that from established news. You have to build that on your own using the digital tools and connecting to journalists like yourself, right? So that you're building that grassroots effect rather than relying on an industry that is broken. And at this point, cowering in the face of this menace.
That is inherently true. I mean, we've seen lots of news organizations. I believe it's ABC News recently do it like a payout, $15 million to Donald Trump. And then some other organizations caving in certain aspects, as like CNN letting Jim Acosta go. Wh- As someone who worked in mainstream, something that people ask me is, do you fear for the state of mainstream media? But as someone who's worked in mainstream media, actually, what is your take on what's happening right now and people's trust uh, rising in independent journalism?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm glad I'm in your hands because I trust you will ask appropriate follow-up questions if you feel I go a little too off the rails. But I think mainstream media is complicit. I think that there is a certain responsibility they hold, not just for the rise of Trump, but
Yes.
for what he's now doing, right? And the way in which he is exercising executive power in a manner that is outright dangerous and an existential threat to the continent. Because it's not just the United States. I'm here in Canada, and we're afraid of an invasion, let alone our economy collapsing.
Exactly.
So I honestly, as someone who spent many years loving, admiring, aspiring to be part of the mainstream media industry, it needs to die. Yeah. And it needs to be replaced by a grassroots alternative, a democratic alternative, rather than the corporate octopus that it has kind of evolved into, which, to your point, is doing everything they can to sort of say, please, Mr. President, don't hurt us, when in fact they should be exposing what is happening on a scale that is both unprecedented and incredibly dangerous.
Exactly, because I feel like what happens if mainstream media would cave to Trump fully, then you would get something like state media, and it's like obeying in advance without even being asked to. It's like, people like Morning Joe going down to Mar-a-Lago before he's even president. And it's like one of the things that irritated me so much was now mainstream media bringing out, saying that Trump is connected to Project 2025. And these are his policies. But before, just going along with the lies and covering all of his speeches, like this is a normal uh two-person, presidential race. So I think it's interesting how for mainstream media, almost they found in Trump someone that they could, who's so outlandish and off the rails that that type of politics surged in viewers. And that surge in viewers created sort of monetary gain over actual truth telling and reporting and journalism. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. I think that profit as the ultimate goal is why Trump is in power, because he is profitable to the attention-based economies, whether NBC or Twitter. Because when Elon Musk bought Twitter, I think we all thought he was an idiot, that, he was spending way too much money for something that was in decline anyway. But really, in buying Twitter, he got access to power. He got a seat in the White House. So it was a bargain if you think about the nature of corruption in American empire. But to your point, the chase of the almighty dollar is what is leading America to fascism. And there were so many business people who I've talked to both personally and, even via the media, who would say, oh, you can't take Trump seriously. Like he's just saying this stuff for effect. He won't really do these things, but he's good for business. Versus now we're going to see mass detentions, right? We're going to see a complete eradication of American institutions, of potentially Medicaid, right? It's keeping a lot of people alive, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. And to your point, those of us as critics, we saw this coming. We were like, no, this is crazy. And I think the media was complicit in allowing those lies because they were making so much money at the same time that exactly. it allowed them to believe that this wasn't going to be real. But now it is real, and the media is terrified.
No, that's what's killing me, because I was able to predict this and see this from a mile away, like years ago, and everyone would call you like hyperbolic or something, be like, no, you're being too extreme. Or like, yes, they have a whole agenda, but they're not actually going to implement it. I'm like, no one's just writes 900 pages for fun. So, I mean, speaking about Elon Musk, for example, here, gosh, Elon Musk. This guy is one of the most richest people in the world right now. He recently got control of the federal payment system, which is freaking lots of people out. He was in charge of firing the FAA director. He's supposed to be leading the Department of Government Efficiency, but it's unclear if that's actually a thing right now. And now they're trying to get rid of other government jobs. What's happening in America is not just the consolidation of power and sort of the greed and the hunger for it, but it's also the beginning of the oligarchy. And that's what we saw at the inauguration front row, the CEOs of Apple and Amazon and all of them sitting right there, something we've never seen before. A lot of people are scared because, you don't want billionaires becoming politicians. I mean, it's one thing to have politicians be politicians. Okay, that's a relegated field. But billionaires becoming politicians, that's when you're completely screwed.
Although, where I agree with you, allow me to take issue with the word politician, because politicians can be held accountable.
Yeah, exactly.
Politicians can be removed from office. Mm-hmm. These guys are becoming rulers.
Yes.
And rulers can be a little more difficult, because to your point, like to our earlier conversation, on the one hand, it would be easy to look at these clowns and say their ideology is money, right? That they believe in money. They see money as the greatest virtue. That's what this is all about. But I actually think that's a mistake. I actually think if we were to ask ourselves as critics, as champions of democracy, what is the ideology of this regime, right? What are their beliefs? What are they looking to try to do beyond all the distraction and the media spectacle that they're so good at? That ideology lies in Elon Musk. That ideology lies in Peter Thiel. And it is a weird ideology that combines artificial intelligence, a desire for space exploration, weird hopes for longevity, right, of using medical science to allow them to live longer, and what is essentially a neo-feudal society, where they are lords and the rest of us are serfs. So where you could look at Trump and go, he's just a narcissist, and outside of attention, he's not very smart. These billionaires, these oligarchs, they are kind of smart in a villainous sort of way. Yeah. And their ideology, they've been openly sharing for years. Exactly. And that's where, to your point about predicting this stuff, they've been saying what they've been wanting to do, and now Elon Musk's got the root password. Like, he's got the digital keys to control the entire government, and I don't understand why the Democrats aren't going, oh my God, what's going on? Somebody stop. Like, why haven't they tried to arrest him? Like, why hasn't Congress exercised whatever power it still has to stop these new rulers? Because I'm making a very bold and radical, to your point about too out there perhaps, that not only is this a coup d'etat in which the executive branch is sidelining Congress and consolidating all power into the White House, but they are deliberately trying to crash the U.S. dollar. They are deliberately trying to crash the U.S. economy because they believe in Bitcoin. Yes. And the reason they believe in Bitcoin is not because of the technology behind Bitcoin. It's because they own a shit ton of it.
Exactly.
Like, that's why he calls Doge, right, the Department of Government Efficiency, because he owns lots of Doge. He's trying to get the price of Doge to the moon because he owns a ton of it. So these are billionaires making a play to become trillionaires while making the rest of us poor for the rest of our lives. And again, where is AOC? Where is the Democrats telling everybody what's going on instead of focusing on tariffs, when tariffs, as painful as they are just a distraction?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen sort of like a few on the line in terms of like the Democratic Party. AOC, for example, you have Representative Jasmine Crockett. Who else has been saying things? I would say Elizabeth Warren. You've seen just like a few, and it gave a lot of people sort of the pause in the question on if the Democrats are truly built for any moment in history. Because if you look at it, it's almost sort of an enraging factor on when is it going to get to the point where the Democrats wake up and realize that you can't bring, as Jasmine Crockett said, a butter knife to a gunfight, because they are literally shooting bullets and we brought in a butter knife. And this is something that you can't just, I mean, they literally tried to cut off federal funding assistance, and then they had to walk stuff back because they didn't know that they cut off food stamps, or they didn't know that they accidentally shut down the Medicaid system. I mean, the incompetence.
But was it accidental though?
Yeah.
Like, I think they got caught doing it.
Exactly.
And they had to walk it back.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing right now is a parallel to fuck around and find out, which is they're constantly pushing the limit to see who responds. And I want to come back to the issue of the Democrats and what they should be doing. But I want to also pull out a thread of what I'm hearing in your criticism legitimately of the Democrats. And I want to throw a question at you, partly because I'm curious, and this is the first time we've been able to meet and chat. So tell me about your book on resistance, because it strikes me that this is a moment for resistance.
Yes.
And to your credit, you've been predicting a lot of this stuff. And perhaps in this case, what we could be needing is an American Spring to riff off the kind of European plays.
Mm.
So, give me and the people I share this video to once it comes out a sense of what you're arguing and what you think America needs in terms of responding to the hellscape we find ourselves in.
Exactly. So in my book Resistance, I talk about sort of like not just the history of authoritarianism and fascism, on the rise and how it's happened before, but also just key things. And one of the rules in there is to not underestimate sort of like the leader. Because a lot of people underestimating the leader in the past is exactly how they risen. Like I talk about, for instance, in the book where um, Hitler rises to power, and there's this German newspaper that puts out articles saying maybe he won't do all the bad, basically saying maybe he won't do all the bad things he said. Maybe that was just for conjecture to get elected to office. And he goes and gets into office, and he waits for a second, and then he does everything. And it's like I see the same things happening now, and so I felt like it was essential to write this book. Some of the history in there, but basically, it's looking through history. The only way to defeat authoritarianism is mass resistance. And I feel like Project 2025 is going into effect right now, but this White House, what's sort of scaring them is, as to your point, they are testing the limits and then they have to walk certain stuff back because they're like, oh, I guess people don't like this. So it's like in the book, the only way to get through this moment is the mass resistance, which I do not feel we're seeing from a large part from the Democratic Party, but we're seeing it more so from, grassroots civilians, which, if not, connected to a political party acting like the house is literally on fire, then this is a situation where we're in a fight of our own, which is not a winning fight if we do not have a major political party assisting us. And it's like things like not agreeing to confirm Trump's nominees, or basically if all Democrats just left Washington for a week, so we could shut the Congress down because the Republican chaos. And it's like, almost to my point, Republicans will do anything they can and they want to maintain, pro-Trump autocracy. The Democrats, this is no longer the era of traditional values and, oh, we can shake hands and still be friends. This is not that. This is not that anymore.
Yeah.
Republicans have been going for blood since the Tea Party. And Democrats have not woken up since. And the continuous loss of elections is in regard to essentially their play nice with politics. And that era is over. They have to be stronger here. And this is a moment that's going to require that, because someone like Elon Musk, I mean, talk about illegal stuff. I mean, this guy is getting access to the federal payment system. He's getting access to sensitive areas in government.
Yeah.
Someone who's not qualified for a security clearance that the military was concerned about prior to the election.
He's a malicious hacker.
Yeah.
Right. And
that part
at some point, I'm certain there's going to be some ransomware that's inserted into government systems, and you got to pay Musk to get them back online, let alone he just erases them all, crashes them, and starts again. Like, think about, again, not to harp on the tariffs, but the primary target, the primary, what's the word? The one who gets hurt the most by these tariffs is the North American auto industry, because they are deliberately configured to have production distributed through Mexico, United States, and Canada. So their parts get dinged, their vehicles get dinged, all the components get dinged, right? The price of American cars is now about to go so through the roof. Of course, who's the beneficiary of that? Tesla. Right? So in all these different ways, it is a malicious hacker. Now, there's an interesting debate that I kind of want to raise here, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Back to the point of resistance. There are some people who, and I think this is more speculative than practical, but there are some people worried that Trump is trying to create a trap, in which he wants mass uprising, in which he wants protests in the streets, in which he wants strikes. And to your point about the Democrats, they should be sabotaging, like, not just not showing up to Congress, but filibustering and just finding ways to just slow down this fascist, regime as it sort of continues to try to rise and recreate the structure of the state. But there are some people who are saying, that could be a trap. He's using this because when he's all alone, he looks like an idiot. He looks like someone fumbling around. But when he's fighting an enemy, whether that's a make-believe Antifa or whether that's, people who are doing, petty property damage, that these are all things that could play into his rise and play into his phenomena, the way the Reichstag fire, played a role in Nazi Germany. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, both as a student of history, but also as someone, who's thought about resistance. And I agree with you 100%. The only way we get through this is mass mobilization, mass social movements that are diverse, distributed, and grassroots.
Exactly. And that's exactly my concern. It's also the major high-level scenario that keeps me up at night, because one of the things that sort of was in Project 2025 that I was looking for him to do on day one was to invoke the Insurrection Act. So to allow him to use the military against civilians. But now that he's in office and it's like 12 days in, I feel what he is waiting for is to continue to do things that he knows are, nationally unpopular, that's facing massive pushback and causing fear and sowing chaos, and going to use that to create social unrest and to make it to the point where people then do take it to the streets, whether that's in protest or violently, to then use that as a moment to invoke the Insurrection Act and go in for the kill and declare martial law. And it's either going to be something like that or a false flag, terrorist attack, which we've seen in other, examples in history with how the dictatorships have started, where you have something like the Reichstag fire, where they then use something like that to go in and be like, okay, well, this just happened. This is why I need to be all powerful. And we don't need a Congress. We don't need a Supreme Court. I have to handle everything. And it's like that moment is on its way, quicker than people realize. And I'm not quite sure if people are going to be alerted to the fact that that's happening. I mean, this is why we need to study history. And one of the things that I talked about last night was, all the plane crashes happening in the United States. And one of my subscribers had commented on the video, essentially directing me a link to a tweet that Elon Musk made, I believe it's like January 9th, about the only way we can end DEI in America is if hundreds of people are killed in plane crashes in the United States.
Boss.
And I went and clicked on it. It's a real tweet.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is not even conspiracy theory world anymore. It's actually, actualized danger personified. And
they say it out loud.
Exactly.
Right? Like they're
Nazis
so brazen. Yeah, they're so brazen. And yet all these people are making excuses for them, right? Or, trying to say, oh, it can't be real. And that's why you made another point earlier, which I think is important, which is, and there's two sides to this, that we can't win without the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there's truth to that. I think, and the alternate, before I get into the Democratic side, or another party, like the Democratic Party could just dissolve.
Yeah.
And then there would have to be something that comes in its place. Like, we cannot abandon the electoral space. We cannot cede the actual elections and the democratic process, no matter how messed up it is. But I actually think here, if I was the James Carville of a new generation, and for whatever silly reason the Democrats were to listen to me, I would give them a very sober but direct argument, which is, on the one hand, entire current leadership just retire. Just, you did great, you're fine, but sorry, your time is over. Just like Moses didn't make it into the promised land. You got us here, but sorry, step aside. But at the same time, the Democrats need a new narrative. And, and I say this not because I believe in it, but because I think we need it. I think the Democrats need to build a new coalition. And this coalition has to be pluralistic in the sense that if we're honest about it, a lot of America hates Trump. A lot of America fears Trump. And the first thing I would do is go right to Wall Street and right to the heart of the Democratic Party machine and go, you guys are fucked. Right? These guys are going to kill the dollar. They're going to kill Wall Street. They're going to kill you. You're holding on to this guy because he's making you money now. Mm-hmm. But the guys behind him are going to stab you in the back and they're going to leave you in the gutter. Right? And then I'd go to all the other constituents from the establishment of the Democratic Party, and I'd say, you need to bankroll this new generation. This new generation is going to be radical. It's going to be, for example, pro-Palestinian. Mm-hmm. It's going to be pro-immigration, right? It's going to be a lot of these ideas that you've associated with the radical left that your opponents are going to call communist, even though fundamentally they're just small d democratic.
Exactly.
And that's your Faustian bargain. Right? We're telling you you're fucked, but we're telling you you need to step aside, right? And allow, and I'm using AOC as one example. I'm sure that there are other up and coming members within the Democratic Party, who have really fresh ideas. But when I say the old guard, I include Bernie too. Yeah. Right. Oh like, gosh, as much as people want to still look to him as the great grandfather, but I am offering like no one's going to take what I'm saying seriously, but that would be the path to is you have to find that commonality between the power on Wall Street, which we call the center, and the righteousness and the ideological appropriateness mm-hmm. of what America would call the far left. Because that is the antidote to this fascism, not a new form of liberalism, not a new form of centrism, and not a sustenance of the failed democratic policies of the past.
Exactly. And that's
I don't think they're going to hear that, though.
That's exactly why people have been screaming that for so long. Let's elevate younger leadership in the party. Younger people have been running for office. It's just been, the establishment over the young person because, they don't know anything. What I have to say is that there is something extremely radical about this generation that Kamala Harris pointed out when she was running for president, that we are impatient for change. And if you go back and just look at the times that we've run for office or just the young movements, if that were to happen in terms of like them have started getting elected back in 2018, this would have been a completely different fight. What we're seeing now sort of is like the hesitation to speak out from members of the Democratic Party, specifically high-level ranking members who have served 80 decades on Capitol Hill. And it's like, we have a system of government that's actually full of octogenarians. And it's extremely depressing to think about that we only have a few select people in Congress that are young. And so when you think about it, it is really a misrepresented population just by age, for example. Because, I've seen this before, but, we've gotten through this before. So I don't think you're underestimating the threat. And that's the problem.
100%. And I think not only misunderestimating it, not even being able to identify it. Mm-hmm. To the point that you and I could see Musk, could see Peter Thiel, could see these guys years ahead of time and understand the threat. I don't think most Congress people, most senators still understand that threat, which is why they're still gobsmacked. But to another thing you said, which I thought was quite insightful, the young people's impatience for change has been captured by the right. Right? Because they have been very good at combined, again, as someone who studied history, Republicans are the opposite thing of conservatives.
Yes.
Right? Like they're radicals and they talk on the one hand about preserving the family, but like they are talking about the kind of radical change that harnesses the desire of young people to feel change and prosperity in their lifetime, in their youth even. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats, for whatever foolish reason, became the party of the status quo.
Yeah.
at a time when the status quo is indefensible.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and that's terrible. And that's why either the Democrats need to completely wipe the slate of leadership clean and start again with young voices, or get out of the way.
Yeah.
Right. And allow a new party to form that is comes out of the grassroots movements that are forming in resistance. But I think where, we have an opportunity and also a source of fear is all bets are off. Like what happened on January 20th and what's happened since is it's not just unprecedented. It's nobody knows what's going to happen next, not even the guys in charge. Mm-hmm. And that means that on the one hand, we're always on the back foot. We're always sort of going, I don't know what's going to happen next. But it means we need new leadership because we need someone to like, hey, we're going to open the borders. Hey, we're going to become sanctuary cities. Hey, here's an idea that I'm starting to think about, and I will be starting to develop on my podcast. What about a new abolitionist movement that abolishes prisons and abolishes police? Right? Like, what if that became the radical cry in the face of fascism? Not prison reform, not police reform. Get rid of it all. And replace it with social workers, replace it with mental health workers, replace it with community safety initiatives, right? And again, radical ideas that before January 20th would have been dismissed as that of a Canadian crackpot. But I predict a month from now, as more and more people start getting rounded up, that there'll be a lot of people saying, yeah, fuck the police and, smash the prisons. Again, radical ideas for a radical time that I'm curious to see how the Democrats either embrace or get out of the way.
I mean, that is so true because, the privatization and the profit of private prisons is a completely different conversation. Even when we talk about sort of like the immigration detention facilities where they're now going to be rounding immigrants up and sending them to Guantanamo Bay, people are going to be making a profit off of that.
But look, here's another crazy dynamic of this. So when they announced the crackdown on immigrants and people without status, because there are no such thing as illegal immigrants, a lot of workers fled California farms.
Yes.
Right? A lot of workers fled farms in Texas, in a lot of these, all agriculture in North America depends upon migrant labor. So without that labor, who are they going to get to feed the country? Prisoners. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is why we're entering into a very scary time where maybe the only solution is to abolish prisons. Right? A very scary situation of indentured servitude once again. Yeah. Right? Based on flimsy criteria, like if you smoke a joint in the wrong state. Exactly. Right? Or whatever the, petty crime that corrupt law enforcement uses to imprison people.
I want to ask you sort of this question here. When it comes to looking at American democracy, because our elections do not just, our elections in the United States are not just about the United States. The rest of the world sees this as well, and it has impact, geopolitically as well. What has been your response, but also your live reaction to watching the burning of American democracy and how terrifying that is as our neighbor, which the president has implied that we should invade and take?
I mean, I think neighbor's the kind of the wrong analogy. We live on the porch. So when the house is burning, like, we're burning too. And we don't really have that much separation. Yeah. I kind of posted on social media a couple of days ago that I hope the Canadian drone industry starts developing fast, because if there's anything we've learned from the war in Ukraine, drones play a big role in defending territory. Canada is terrified right now. Canada's economy is collapsing. We have a federal election impending. I live in Ontario, which is the largest province. They just announced 3 days ago an election in response to these threats. So it is utter chaos. Canada is a vocally, militantly anti-American at this current moment. We actually just booed the American anthem at a national hockey game.
Wow. Yeah.
But there are a lot of wealthy people. There are a lot of tech oligarchs in Canada who would love to be part of the United States. So this is a really contested time. Internationally, I think alliances are being reconfigured. There are some Canadians saying we should join the European Union, and the EU is kind of open to the idea. And I will state, as someone who follows the news, that our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, has started negotiations with the Chinese government for a free trade agreement.
Wow.
So again, geopolitically, everything's up in the air. But come on, if Canada were to enter a free trade agreement with China, that would be grounds for an American invasion. Right? So this is where we are in strange times. And to your point, if the house is on fire, we're on the porch and we're going, come on, Jeremiah, we got to put this thing out or else we're all going to be on fire. So, that's partly why I'm eager to talk to more Americans and foster a greater cultural and political dialogue. Because quite frankly, friend, we're in this together.
That is so true. It is a terrifying time. Once again, my guest is Jesse Hirsh. He is a former Canadian journalist as well as a guy who's enthusiastic about life and farm. Mr. Hirsh, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jeremiah, and I hope you'll come onto my show.
Absolutely. I would love to. This was a great conversation.
Right on.